On this episode, we'll discuss balancing modern church tech with sacred spaces. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. I'm Kendall Connor, and we've got a great conversation planned for you today, a subject that I'm personally extremely passionate about, and that is church tech, or your church may call it production, or you may call it media, whatever you want to call it. I love this area of ministry. In fact, when I first got plugged into church as a teenager, it was one of the things that kept me coming back. And I've carried that love for this area of ministry for many, many years. And so it gets me extremely excited to talk to our guest today because, like me, this is his area of expertise. And so I'm excited to talk to our guest today. If you've never connected with our guest, Toby Walters, before, let me tell you a little bit about him. He is the founder of ChurchGear, a company that is dedicated to making, I love this, making church production affordable, accessible, and achievable for congregations of any size or budget. All the church leaders listening to this said amen to the affordable word that he dropped in there on that bio. I love this, that he's been able to go into churches all across the country. Him and his team, they work to help these ministries being able to really utilize technology and to bring the most out of their gear, get them the right tools that they need to help. And he's been working in church production since, like me, like he was a teenager. And so this is a big area of passion of his. He jokes in his bio that when he was a kid that he was they were trying to get him to stop terrorizing the pastor, as he puts it, and to put that energy into running church sound, and something stuck with that. I feel like I can kind of relate to that in his story a little bit. But he has spent several decades leading in worship, going around traveling, and then this passion for tech kind of came back around 2020. He was able to get involved in this area and really use that to help other people. So not only is he traveling and helping different churches, he also hosts the Church Gear podcast, where he gets to interview production leaders from some of the most influential churches in the country. He speaks at conferences on church tech and media and production and these kind of different areas. And it's just amazing the ministry that he has with that. Toby, he lives in Franklin, Tennessee with his wife and his daughters, and they're plugged into their local church there, where he jokes that he's still giving his pastor a hard time. You're going to love this guy. You're going to love getting to talk with him today. I'm excited to jump into our conversation. We're going to get to talk about balancing that tech with the sacred spaces. So the modern tech with the sacred. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd like to encourage all of you listeners out there, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button wherever you're enjoying our show to make sure that you stay in the loop as we continue to release these conversations. So without further ado, let's welcome Toby to the show. How are you today, man? Thanks for being on here with us.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So I got to ask right out of the gate, are you still terrorizing that pastor that was in your bio?
Yeah, you'd have to ask him. He did give me an endorsement on my book, and maybe that was just to placate me, so I'd stop bothering him. But I'm sure when he sees me, making my way down the aisle on Sunday mornings, and I want to chat with him after service, he's like, "Dear Lord, what's he going to ask today?"
What? I would probably say that about our lead pastor too. Yeah. When he sees me coming, he's going wondering what am I going to bring to the table that day.
Yep.
So I can relate to that. I want to jump into this conversation today with something that we ask all of our guests when they come on the show. What's something that doesn't make that public bio that maybe all your family and friends would know about you?
Part of the problem is that I have no shame. So much about me makes it in my public persona. I actually hired a social media manager 6 months ago because
Nice.
I know I need to post the stuff, but I hate doing it. And so she'll keep asking me like, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? I'm like, whatever. I'll do anything. I'll do anything for attention. So something that might surprise a lot of people is that I'm actually an introvert. I come off as people just expect or assume that I'm an extrovert, but I think I'm officially what's called now an outrovert. I'm an outgoing introvert. So
I love that they have a term for this. That might be me, Toby. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. That might be me because I love to be around people, but at the same time, at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, I need my me time. I need
Mhm.
this. Well, that's awesome. Well, I know that we talked a little bit about church gear, but I know that you've been able to help so many ministries over the years now. Tell us a little bit about that journey. What really is your big passion in this thing?
Yeah, so, just going back to my story a little bit, growing up in a little Baptist church, and my dad was a music director, and when I was a teenager, he could see mischief in my eyes and knew I was either gonna tear down the church or he better give me something productive to do. So
Yeah.
he said, "Why don't we put you in the sound booth and see if you
Mm,
can, fall in line in there?" And I fell
yeah.
in love. Just the fact that I had flashing lights and moving knobs and just the power that I suddenly have to turn the pastor's mic up or down if I didn't like what he was saying.
Yes.
And, also being at a little Baptist church, like, we had no money. We had no budget. There was, like, a production budget wasn't even a
Yeah, like unheard of, right?
yeah, it was unheard of. So I had to suddenly come up with creative ways. If I want a piece of gear, how am I gonna get it? Well, I could do a bake sale or a car wash fundraiser like all the youth groups used to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's something we're not using and I could sell that and then use that money to then buy what I wanted. And that's what I
Wow.
started doing even at a young age. And then, as I went on my journey to become the next Chris Tomlin, like so much of us worship hopefuls do, and, in order to actually pay the bills, I would just buy and sell gear and buy and sell gear, and then
Wow.
just decades later, I felt like God was tapping me on the shoulder saying, "Toby, you've been around the church your whole life, and you know how to buy and
Yeah.
sell gear. Do you wanna put these 2 passions together?" And that's really the vision that launched ChurchGear, and in March of 2020,
Wow.
I put up a website and then discovered that every church in America has the same problem. They either have too much gear or they can't afford the gear they need. And so we were able to just help a problem that is
Yeah.
universal in the church world.
Well, yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that because 'cause I'm thinking about my own church, and I think, in a house, you have a junk drawer of random things, but I feel
Mhm.
like sometimes, in churches, there's, like, random closet.
Yep. It's called the
And I'm just
graveyard.
saying, yeah, the graveyard, yeah, of different things, and, yeah, it's like, for whatever reason, maybe it phased out or, like, that idea is not still going or, like, it got outdated or whatever, like, you
Mhm.
have, like, this graveyard of different stuff, and so, yeah, I love that there's probably the idea that there's probably another ministry out there that could really use that and use it for kingdom purpose is, there's something to that for
Yeah.
sure. Well, very cool. Well, I know that, because you work with so many churches and you've seen probably a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear from you on what are some of the most common tech, production, media mistakes that you see happening in a lot of church? Maybe some of those things that are distracting from the real reason that we're there, right?
Yeah. I would say, just something that comes to mind, first of all, is either too little or too much. We
Mm,
all, especially after COVID, we can all see every church online now. We can all watch
yeah,
Elevation, we can watch Highlands, we can watch all these amazing churches. And then,
sure.
as so many pastors do, we're visionaries. And so we see this and we go to a conference and we'll see it. We'll see the giant LED wall and we'll see
Yeah,
all the vocalists across the stage. And we think, how can we bring that home to our church of 200 people and replicate it? That
yeah.
that's your first mistake. Don't replicate it.
Mm,
Build in your context, or then another church that just says it's not important. We're not going to prioritize it.
yeah,
We're a family church, and every ministry is different. You've got to do what you feel like the Spirit is leading in your context, but you are inviting people to church that live in a world where production is
yeah.
everywhere. You go to
Wow,
concerts, you go to movies, you watch streaming events, you go to the mall, and there's production
right.
everywhere and you just don't know it. And
Yes.
so when you walk into a church and then all of a sudden you're like, did I just step back into 1994? It's
Mm,
distracting. Or if you go
yes.
in and you're like, this is way too much. I didn't go to the Taylor Swift Eras Tour concert tonight. Like, why is it so over the top? And so just
Right.
really not understanding how to hit the target with with your context and what you're trying to do at your church.
Yes. I love the idea that there's this balance to find in that, right? Because you don't wanna walk as you said, have people walk into a place and you feel like they stepped back in time.
Mhm.
Because I feel like that takes away from the credibility of the organization, like, it takes away from some of that. But then there's also I think we've all seen places or been in a places, or even I'll admit, I've made those mistakes myself of going over the top, right?
Mm.
Of doing too much. And so, yeah, finding that balance is so important, and I think, that's probably the best place to go. So right out of the gate, I feel like that's some great wisdom for these media teams, for these production teams, to find that good spot in the middle. I know that you have a book that you've written, and I wanna hear about that because I feel like there's not a ton of books on this topic, and so
Mm.
I'm excited to hear a little bit about that. I know that you talk a little bit in there about having a distraction-free environment. What
Yeah.
does that really look like?
And I've heard it from so many different pastors, and I love it. The idea of you want to create an environment it draws people in and points them to Jesus,
Mm,
and anything that distracts from that is not cool. So,
yeah.
whether you're doing too little or too much, if you
Mm,
aren't doing something with excellence, it's going to be distracting. And so, I know excellence can be a very hot button issue in a lot of churches. Then it starts to feel like a performance. But also, I think the Bible is just full of examples of God
mm,
calling us to excellence in our worship. And so I really challenge to start with that. And if you can't do it with excellence, then maybe
yeah,
consider not doing it until you can. And there are so many ways, like technology has made so many amazing things, like multi tracks for the churches that are familiar with that. You
yeah,
have a kid who's learning guitar, and his parents and his grandparents love seeing him on stage. It warms their heart.
right.
It makes them feel like, oh, we're really pouring into him. But everybody
Yeah,
else is now distracted because he doesn't have the skill level yet.
right.
But you could use something like multi-tracks where you have him on stage and you teach him how to engage in worship with his face and his body and his actions. And you say, buddy, just play your heart out up there. Your sound is muted and your guitar is multi-tracks. And so
Yeah,
using some of these technologies to create non-distracting environments, um, you could do it with the same thing with visuals. And when you have lights hitting people in the face, I can't tell you how many times I've had a moving light pan across and it hits me in the eyes, and all of a sudden I'm snapped out of my, worship
yes,
moment, or
yes.
feedback in mics, vocalists that can't sing on key, anything that's distracting is just it's going to remove my ability to engage with Jesus easily.
Yeah. Uh, so many great things that you brought up, and I feel like that distraction-free environment, I heard it said like this one time, they said, like, the best compliment you can give to someone in the church tech world and church media or production is like, we didn't even realize
Yep.
you were there. We just
Yep.
had a great experience. Now, I'm here to advocate for for all of the production folks out there. We do appreciate thank yous, and we do appreciate
Yes.
a pat on the back every now and then. But at the same time, for you to go like saying like, yeah, we weren't even thinking about that. We were just enjoying the moment and really
Mhm.
were able to focus in worship. That's a successful day. That's a distraction-free environment. I also wanna hit on I wanna say I've seen the success stories of, getting the kid up there who maybe doesn't have the guitar down 100% and
Mhm.
using those tracks along the way. My nephew, he was that kid, and now he has gone on from now I'll say it like this, he is now included in the mix. But he learned there, there's so much to say about just being able to get up there and demonstrate worship and having that passion. And
Mhm.
so that's a pretty good that's a hack for this area of ministry, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty cool. Well, I think about there's the tension of the modern technology, the
Mhm.
modern production, and then preserving the things that are important, that sense of the sacred things. You
Yeah.
talk about this some in your book. Can you highlight some of those things for us today?
Sure. I make the argument, and I've heard this from so many people, that really the peak of the production experience in the Church of America has already passed. So, Willow Creek pioneered so much of that live
Yeah,
worship presence production, just the
sure.
biggest show in town, so to speak. And Gen Z, and I'm sure a lot of pastoral leaders are very familiar with this phenomenon that Gen Z and Gen Alphas are saying, we don't want production unless you can tie it to something biblically. If there's a
Mm,
theological reason behind it, don't just have moving lights and, you know,
yeah.
big sound and all this stuff unless you're explaining to me it theologically, and there's this desire to get back to sacred elements.
Yeah.
So, there can be amazing things, churches that still have stained glass windows and oak columns and pews and this just sacred space, and
Yes.
then filling it with very tasteful, non-distracting, again, production elements. It can be
Yeah.
a beautiful blend and just very attractive to worshipers these days that are trying to find that perfect balance.
I like that because and I love the shift that this younger generation is bringing in because I feel like, sometimes we can see just like throughout history, like we go all into something, right? We explore, we like take it to the max, and then I feel like you have this shift that happens, and I love that it's happened with our younger generation who are diving into scripture more than ever statistically and all these different things. They're saying we love the good, we love the excellent, but
Yeah.
we want to make sure that there's substance there, and so that's really refreshing to me, and it's just good to see. It's a good reminder too for those who are serving in this area of ministry that we can't lose hold to the things that are the most important, the
Mhm.
things that we're trying to amplify, and so that's pretty good. I'm curious to hear about. I know that there's different churches that have different sizes, different styles, different resources. What does good production or good technology, good production for a church, what does that look like for the small church versus the large church? How do you make it work in your specific context?
Yeah. Again, I would say minimize down to the base level of which you can do with excellence, and start with you talk about production and it's AVL, audio video lighting,
Yeah.
and I talk in my book that the very first thing to do is even just think of the source on stage before you put something through a sound system and amplify it to more people. Is it a good source? So
Mm,
can your vocalist sing on key? Is your guitar out of tune? Do you have like old ratty drum heads that don't sound good? Is your tie a busy pattern? And so therefore, then you're going to put yourself on camera, and then you have
right.
those
Right.
squiggly lines. So just thinking about your source, and then next is just audio in the room. I think a lot of pastors get down the road and they think about, let's get a great live stream. You can't
Yeah.
have a great live stream until you have a great experience in the room. It simply doesn't work.
Yeah.
You've got to reorder those things. So, getting the sound in the room right, which means that your room needs to sound right. If you are
Yeah.
in a great big warehouse with no acoustical treatment, no soft spaces, nothing on the ceiling to stop the
Yeah.
sound, and then you put a sound system in there, it's going to be brutal to your people. So getting your room
Mm,
right, and then just getting basic sound in the room, and even just thinking about, let's use an example of wireless mics, for example.
yeah.
You watch Elevation or Gateway or any of these churches, and you see all these
Yeah.
vocalists on stage, and they all have wireless mics, and you think, I would love to have wireless on our stage,
Yeah.
but then you don't realize that that could literally be 50 times as expensive as a decent used wired mic. And so
Wow.
then you think, "Whoa, for 50x," and I'm not exaggerating, 50x,
Yeah.
it can be an accurate, representation of the increase in cost. You start to
Wow.
think like, "Okay, we can just clean up our cable runs on our stage, just make them a little
Yeah.
bit more organized and neat." And so there are these ways, and then you see all these churches again have drum sets in cages, and so if you think about the cage could be $8,000 itself. Some of these cages cost $8,000. And
Wow.
then you've got to think about the drum set and the mics and then all the processing that goes into it. And could you just ask your drummer to play softer?
Mm,
So some of these simple solutions where again
yeah.
we see these big giant productions, we think, how do we do this at our church? You've got to minimize and like shrink down your expectations into your context, and then it could be extremely affordable.
I love those. I mean, those were two simple hacks that I feel like would bring some major cost savings. They are, it's funny when you start talking about the solutions, and I think a lot of times it comes down to we can't get caught up in that comparison, the comparison game of like, oh well,
Mhm.
man, we saw that this place had it. We really love what they're doing over there. We want to be just like them. We want to try some of those things. Sometimes the right solution is to, use the wired mic, right?
Mhm.
I hearing you talk through some of the gear, and I didn't prepare you for this, and when I sent over the questions, but I know that right off the top of your head, you probably have a couple of favorites when it comes to the different types of gear. Any quick recommendations for all the folks that love the gear on the other side when it comes to maybe a soundboard or a microphone? Any quick recommendations that you'd give?
Sure. I mean, let's take soundboards for example. Obviously, it depends on your budget and how many channels you need, but I mean, you
Yeah,
can buy a used Behringer X32 for $1,000, and that's an
yeah,
incredible console. I love Allen and Heath stuff. You can, it's a little like it's the next step up, and it just sounds great, and it's very volunteer friendly. If you want to get a slightly bigger system, like a Waves LV1 is an amazing system. But you're talking more in the
yeah,
15,000 to
yeah.
$20,000 range. And just for some pastors or listeners that thinking, whoa, 15,000, we can go up to 250,000. So just thinking in that context,
There's so much range. It's hard to
yeah,
give recommendations and things like that, but I just kinda nerd out at the gear some.
yeah.
Any other area you wanna drop some quick recommendations into?
Uh, Microphones, just a Shure SM58 and 57. You could have your entire worship ministry on 57s and 58s, and you're talking $50 a pop used. It's the same mic Bono uses. If Bono
That's
sounds
yeah.
good on it, then it's good enough for your church.
That
So
it's like
just
what do they say? That's like the workhorse of the
yep,
music industry, right? Like, yeah, you're not too far from Nashville, right? I mean, you see all the hear all the vocalists there. I mean, like, yeah, it's carrying so many of our favorite artists, right?
yeah. And then there are other places to hack. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day. Gear is kind
Yeah,
of our forte, but a lot of churches are buying Chinese-made lighting fixtures. They're not the name brands. They're a lot cheaper, like 20% the cost. And everyone admits, like, they might not be quite as good, but
right.
they're not 20% as good. They're almost as good. And then you can afford to buy a few extras. And it's just, if one of those goes down, Sunday's not ruined. You can still have
Yes.
church if one of your lighting fixtures go out, and they're easy to replace. So just thinking about those creative cost saving places, like don't skimp on your soundboard. If your soundboard goes down, Sunday goes down. But
Yeah.
a light, you're
Yeah.
good.
Right. Well, coming from the a church planner world, 100%. What a great recommendation. We've more than a few times have uh, got some light fixtures on Amazon, and again, it isn't maybe your main light or the thing that you
Mhm.
depend on, but yeah, if you want to get a little creative, yeah, I mean that's a great way to lean for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I love talking about this, and but I want to make sure that we get to talk through some of these questions that we've discussed before. I know that expectations. There's I'll say it like this. There's a lot of expectations that come when for that production ministry. When things go wrong, everybody kind of does that collective. They turn around and they want to look at the tech booth, right?
Yep.
For the church leaders that are listening to this today, how can they set the right expectations for production, for tech, to make sure that they're not going overboard, but also keeping that standard?
Yeah, I in my book I did a deep dive into a theology of production, and some pastors might be like giving me a little head tilt, thinking there's no production in the Bible, buddy. Like this is a new discipline, and I'm going to argue that there was production in the Bible. We just hadn't
Mm,
applied electricity to it yet. So
wow.
if you think of the walls of Jericho, they marched around and they blew their trumpets. That's audio production. That was God told them this is how you do it in an audio way. And then Gideon and his army of 300, they smashed torches. That's a lighting cue. Like all of a sudden, these smashed torches and the lights come on and the armies scatter.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then even the details for the tabernacle that God gives to the creators and the artisans are so intricately detailed that that's the first mention of somebody being filled with the Holy Spirit in the
Mm,
entire Bible. And so thinking about, well, maybe these elements in our church, the same thing about the tabernacle, that these design elements, the environment, the lighting, the sound design, is actually really important to God, is really important to a worship environment that doesn't distract. So, first of all, coming from that standpoint that the Bible very much
Yeah.
says production is important, you need to think about it as an important discipline. And then, how often do we hear pastors say from the stage, let's thank the band, let's thank the worship leader? I tell you, when I was a worship leader, every week somebody came up to me and said, "Thank you for the music. You're so talented," and just gushed upon me. When I was doing production, nobody said that. They all just turned around, as you said, whenever
Oh,
something
it's
sounded off.
painful.
Yeah, even if it was the worship leader's problem, they look at me.
Yeah.
So just loving on your production people. They're naturally introverts. They work behind the scenes, but they're also
Yeah.
human beings.
Mm,
They're not human
that's
doers.
good.
So just loving them as part of your staff ministry, um, your gospel compelled human beings.
Yeah. What a good reminder. And yeah, nothing but love for the folks that are out there working behind the scenes. And, that even it goes beyond even the tech ministry, it goes beyond the production side. I mean, there's so many folks that work behind the scenes. What a good reminder that any of your volunteers, team members, staff members, that maybe aren't getting that thank you or aren't in front of everybody,
Hmm.
to just include that, especially, around those big days. There's so many, or, good days or bad days, a little thanks goes a long way.
Yeah. And I was a quick little story I heard from our podcast recently of a pastor compelling vision about how production is more than just working behind the scenes. He pointed at a camera operator and said to the entire congregation, that person is a missionary.
Mm,
Because right now there are people watching in Africa of our live stream, and they're seeing it through that person's artistry, their camera viewpoint, and what they're doing
wow.
absolutely matters. They're translating the gospel to people across the world. They are a missionary. And I'll tell you, that camera operator will never see his ministry the same way after hearing that. So sharing
I
some of
love
that
that.
that vision to your people is just crucial.
Well, one of my favorite things that I do have gotten to do at our church is if we have someone who is a first time guest, if they come to our church for the very first time, we always ask them right on their card, connect card, or on the form or whatever they fill out, how did you hear about us? And in this day and age, most people are going to say that they checked out the website first. They're going to have watch that service and just get a feel for what it's like. I love being able to take that to our production team whenever
Mm,
they're huddling up or whatever and say, "Hey guys, I just want to remind you what you're doing is making a difference. This person came to church for the first time today
yeah.
because they were able to see that live stream." And those are getting more frequent, as I mentioned. And so it is a good reminder that whether it's on the other side of the world or just someone down the street, it does make a pretty big difference.
Yeah, totally.
It kinda brings up the subject of live streaming. I mean, like, so many churches are wrestling over that, right? They're like, "Okay, like, is this, what's the best way to go about that these days? What's the best way to make it excellent?" Can you speak to that at all?
Oh man, we can get nasty on this one. So I mean, my first question is, why are you live streaming is the first thing I want to
Mm,
know. And is it
yeah.
because you have people watching and tuning in from home and they're finding your church and they're hearing the gospel? That's a wonderful
Wow.
reason.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it because everybody else is doing it, or you're doing it because you had to do it during COVID, but do you anymore? How many people are watching? And
Wow.
then I like to split the conversation when the message starts. So the worship on live stream and the message are two wildly different things. So
Mm,
if you have it, almost doesn't even matter how many people you have watching from home. Let's take the real hard look at reality and say how many people are just
yeah.
tuning in for the message. So if you're a church and you say, look, we're just going to put out the message, that's totally fine. That's okay. Also, the
Yeah.
work to put out a good live stream for a message is about 2% of the work and the cost that goes into putting a good live stream of your worship.
Wow.
Now, crazy idea. What if you had your live stream every single week of your message? It doesn't even have to be live. You could put it out after the fact. That's okay too. And what if you had pre-recorded worship that you did intentionally? So
Wow.
let's
Wow.
say you have good worship week in and week out, but when people watch your live stream, ooh, it's rough on the live stream. It doesn't translate
Yeah.
well because that is an incredibly expensive and manpower heavy discipline to get a really good worship live stream out there. What if
Yeah.
you did like Mariners Church, for example, in Southern California? They do all their worship content for live stream pre-recorded. They
Mm.
they batch record every 6 weeks. They'll come in and they'll do like 20 songs in a day. And then they have 20 songs to piece together worship
Yeah.
sets for their live stream every week. And so, what if you did
Wow.
that even once a year? You got your best musicians, you maybe even contracted
Yeah.
in some musicians, you brought in, if you like the look of Elevation, you like the look of Gateway, bring in one of their people to contract that day to help,
Wow.
record an amazing worship set and then just sprinkle that in as your live stream. You're not fooling anybody. You're not saying this is, what we
Right. This is,
do.
yeah.
You're not trying to trick them. You're just
Yeah.
trying to put your best foot forward. Just like if you're on a dating app. I'm assuming most of our pastor listeners on dating apps right now, but if you were, you'd put the best pictures of yourself. You describe yourself in the best light. It's kind of like, a first date. If people are coming to see your church on the live stream on the first date, it's a really bad experience. You're
Wow.
just turning them away. So, sorry, do you want me to step back off my soapbox now?
I love the different ideas that you presented, and I feel like it's a mix. In 2026, there's so many different ways that people are going about this, and I feel like that's really cool. Even some of your ideas that you mentioned about, recording some and kind of piecing them together, that's something that in different seasons, especially going through pandemic and all of these different things, our church, a lot of churches were getting creative. We were figuring out, and
Yeah.
I can remember setting up a studio, and we've done that for different times, even holidays, right? Where like maybe, on New Year's Sunday or something like that, when we weren't doing a in-person worship gathering or worship service, having something like that and we recorded. There's so many different ways that you can get creative with it. I also love that you mentioned, the ideas of there's the churches that are only streaming their messages.
Hmm.
I think in this season of our church, I think we live streamed the whole thing, but then we only archive the message as a part of that, right?
Hmm.
Because we do know, like, I don't know that there's any worship leader who's going back on the live stream and feeling it doesn't feel the same. It's going to be
Yeah.
different. You have to be intentional with it. So I love that, there's so many different ways that you can kind of go about it. And man, what some great suggestions that you brought up today. So I appreciate that. Well, I want to ask you about, as we look ahead, what's coming next? What do you see kind of in the pipeline for 2026 and beyond for the world of church production, of technology? Where is this thing headed?
Well, what I hope is that more and more churches can adopt the technology because the barrier to entry has just gotten so low.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do a compelling visual live stream, you can do it with 3 cameras. You can do it with some decent lighting and the right microphones, and
Mm,
that's just not that expensive anymore. And
yeah.
then you might say, well, I need people to run it pretty soon. Now, let's
Yeah.
let's say, we're called to make disciples. So as much as you can get people involved in the ministry of your church, very important. But if you don't have enough volunteers to run everything in your production, man,
Yeah.
AI capable systems are just becoming more and more a reality where one person can run 3 cameras on sliders, on robotic sliders, and it just is almost automated. They're just pressing a couple buttons.
Wow.
That kind of thing is very much, you can do it today, but it's going to become easier and easier and easier. So I just hope that more and more churches that historically never have been able to execute or afford non-distracting, excellent production, that it'll become just so much more available, so much easier to implement. And I'd love to see that.
Yeah. I love that too. And the idea too that, the technology is becoming more accessible to people. I feel like whether that's AV or L, audio, video, or lighting, I feel like those things are because every person, I just think about how simple it is, how many people, influencers now, they're not having huge production setups or
Hmm.
massive cameras. They're just using the tool that's in their hand, their cell phone, and it makes me hopeful. I think maybe that more and more churches will be able to use the technology that's available, and I think as the as more people are becoming content creators, Do you feel like the standard is coming down a little bit in what people expect in terms of the kind of content that they'll engage with? What do you see when it comes to that?
I think it's probably a very interesting, psychological eh, conversation that, I think AI capable and content creation is becoming like it's just ramping up and up and up. And we see it in commercials for the Super Bowl. And then
Right,
there's just like
right.
a natural pushback to human beings of saying, that feels inauthentic. And so then it gets way back down to just somebody running around with an iPhone without any special elements or lighting or AI
Yeah,
integration. So it's just interesting to watch it kind of go in waves as
yeah,
humanity reacts to how they feel about it.
right. Yeah. Well, it's what a time to be alive. I feel like I say that about every other week as a new AI tool or something comes around, but
Yeah.
it is fun and I love to geek out over the latest tools and things like that, and so it makes me hopeful. At the same time, I know that, it does so often come back to just the simple things. I know that one of the big themes for our podcast is just healthy churches, healthy
Mhm.
leaders, having being focused on the right things, on the main thing. Um, that's a big theme for our podcast. I'd love to be able to hear from you. In your opinion, what would you say is one essential component of a healthy church? Does it mean having the latest gear?
No. If you want the latest gear, I mean, we all like new toys. Let's just admit
Yeah,
it. That's okay.
yeah,
But it has nothing to do with a healthy church. I think just the Great Commission that Jesus gave us of just making disciples. So, do people feel like they have genuine human connection in your church? And
mm,
sometimes, technology can foster that, or technology
yes,
can draw away from that. And so,
yeah,
using it in that balance to just build human connection, because especially in this day and age with social media and AI and Zoom calls and this podcast where we're 3 states
yeah,
away or whatever we are,
right,
that we're designed still and we're craving that in-person human connection. And so
that's right,
how can your church utilize the tools and the technology today to ultimately get more of that?
yeah, that's so good. Well, as we kinda wrap things up today, something that we love to do on the show is a final 5 rapid fire round of questions. Are you up for
Yeah,
the challenge?
give it to me.
Alright, number 1 is, what's one book on this subject or maybe something similar that you'd recommend to church leaders? We know your book, so tell us about that, but then maybe give us one more.
I have, let's see, something I read recently. I mean, I'm reading Craig Rochelle's Winning the War in Your Mind. That's a, just
Good
fascinating
one.
thing as we talk about mental health. I've read a lot
Yeah.
about AI recently. The problem with AI books is they'll be outdated by the time they're written by the day.
Yeah.
But just implementing some of these things into your church and thinking in that way. Um, and then I love biographies. I'm reading a biography of James Dyson right now. If you have a Dyson vacuum in your house, his story is
Very cool.
fascinating. So there's some for you.
Alright. I love biographies as well, so I'm gonna have to check that one out. I'll have to add that to my list. Well, number 2 is the last thing that you listen to on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen to your music these days.
Okay, so I have a teenage daughter, and the best advice I ever got on loving her is adopt her music. And
Mm.
thank God she is really into 90s grunge rock right now. So
Hey, I
we're
like that.
listening to Green Day and Soundgarden. She had Red Hot Chili Peppers going the other day. And for anybody that's saying, "Get behind me, Satan," she loves Jesus too. So we can love Jesus and the Red Hot Chili Peppers music at the same time. Just making that argument.
Awesome. What about, your favorite piece of technology or software or app right now?
I've fallen down the rabbit hole of Claude Code and
Mm.
Cowork, so I am
Yeah.
all in on what it may or may not be able to do for me. You might talk to me in a month and I have no brain cells left, but we'll see.
Gotta love all the new AI tools that are coming out. So what would you tell that person that's sitting in their tech booth this Sunday? What piece of advice would you give them? Maybe it doesn't have to be a formal quote.
Sure. I would say to be encouraged that your ministry matters. What you're doing is essential to the moving forward of the gospel, that your
Mm,
pastor can't preach, your worship leader can't lead if you aren't skilled and talented at what you're doing to amplify their message. So even though nobody may say thank you this week, I'm saying thank you and to remind you that what you do absolutely matters.
that's awesome. Could you give any advice really quickly? Um, any advice really quickly that maybe has helped you in your journey when it comes to church tech and these kind of things?
Build your network of other people that do what you do and do it better. So, no matter what
Mm,
city you're in, there are churches around you. There are likely bigger churches, and it doesn't have to be bigger, but there are people around you that have been doing your discipline for longer, and they would love to connect. They would love to get coffee. They'd love to share resources. They'd love for you to come see what they're doing. They'd love to be invited to come see what you're doing. Don't
wow.
be isolated in your role at your church. Reach out to the community. If there isn't one in your city, build it yourself. Start getting people together for lunch gatherings at different churches, whatever it is. Your mental health will increase exponentially if you can just know at least 3 other people that do what you do at different churches around town.
That is amazing. That's really great advice. Well, I know that folks are going to want to hear more from you. Where can people follow you? Where can they stay connected?
Sure. My website is tobywalters.com. It just links to my page on churchgear.com, which is our company. And then we have the Church Gear podcast available on, wherever you get your podcasts. You can hear me and my co-host talk a lot of nonsense, but then you can also hear all the stories behind the scenes of, Prestonwood and Willow Creek and Saddleback, because all their
Very cool.
production leaders have come on and talked about that stuff. And then I'm on the socials at the Toby Walters, all those places that annoying people that try and grab attention put themselves.
Toby, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate all the advice that you've shared. I've had a lot of fun with it, and I just can't thank you enough for coming on and talking with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For all of our listeners that are at home, be sure to check out all the resources. In the show notes, we'll link up all these things, these links, so that you can go and grab them, the books, all of the links and the socials and all those things so that you can stay connected with Toby. This has been a lot of fun. It's been a great encouragement to me. Just a quick reminder for everyone who's listening, if this has been valuable to you, would you consider sharing this with a friend? Sharing this with somebody that's on your team that's maybe serving, volunteer, or staff member that's serving in that area of ministry, maybe someone at another church that you know that would find some value in this conversation today, or maybe just be encouraged by it. We want to get this into the ears of as many church leaders as we can. And so those shares go a really long way. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're enjoying our show. We want to make sure that you keep hearing about all these resources as we put them out. I'll say this, until next time, keep leading well right where you are in your city, in your community. You're making a big difference. And we'll see you right back here next week on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.